Thank you, Mr. Neuer. And for those of you in the audience who have not seen this, let me tell you that many of the speeches of Mr. Neuer, also the speeches to the Human Rights Council, are available on the internet. They are remarkable speeches, and I think you met our expectations as a voice of the victims, as a voice in favor of human rights. And after having worked 40 years for a government, justifiably and rightly criticizing governments for sometimes looking the other way. It is now my pleasure to ask Mrs. Graentiz.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers that the NGO Committee on the Status of Women in Vienna could take part in this event this evening. And I also would like to say a few words what the role of this committee is within the work of NGOs at the UN. The Vienna NGO Committee on the Status of Women comprises more than 20 international NGOs that are members and that send representatives that mostly live in the area here, but that represent the international work of these mostly very big and well-known international NGOs. The role of the committee is twofold. On one hand, we work together with our sister committees of New York and Geneva to bring forward the agenda of women's rights. Women's rights are human rights. You all do remember this was first put on the UN agenda and voted for in this big human rights conference in Vienna 20 years ago. And we work towards the yearly commissions in New York. There are different themes so that the ideas and the proposals from all around the world can be concentrated at the commission in New York. The other work that we do, and which I think actually is perhaps even as important or even more important, is that we try or we work on integrating into the UN agenda at Vienna the female aspect. There is often talk about mainstreaming women's issue, having women on an equal playing field with men. But within the United Nations, there are many agencies where women are not so important, and this is what our committee in Vienna feels we have to work on. We have to promote women's perspective in these. In Vienna, the most important of the UN agencies is crime prevention and criminal justice. And here I can close the circle to today's commemoration of violence against women and elimination of that violence against women. Because very often it is women who are victims of crimes. Very often it makes a difference whether the victim is a woman or the victim is a man, whether the perpetrator is a man or a woman. And this is what we can do in Vienna. We also should always remember that violence against women is connected to many things that have to be changed. And here we certainly would also need the help of other big organizations and of diplomats. When we talk about violence in armed conflict situation, we often have to consider that women are violated or beaten, or there are other forms of violence against them, because in many societies, women are still considered as part of the estate of their man, like his house, his land, his cattle, his woman. And in order to punish these men, in order to show them who has the power, who is the conqueror, it is the woman who suffers. And this is something one should look at into all these armed conflicts that we still have going around the world, and that should not be neglected in the sense of armies are not able to distinguish who they are doing violence to. This is not true. They really do that. The other thing is that I'm very happy that in the last 30, 40 years, women were able to put a spotlight on what we call quite easily domestic violence. Many years ago, violence within the families was regarded as something private, something you don't talk about, something you can't see. And it was only 30, 40 years ago that women started to look at that, to say, we cannot go on. We cannot have this system of violence and power within a society, because when we want to have a world that has more peace and more justice, as the United Nations have started after the Second World War to create, we have to consider that armed conflicts cannot be solved by arms, but conflicts can never be solved by violence. Whenever there is a conflict, the solution is in getting together, respecting the other side, talking together. And this has to start within the families, within the communities, within the countries, because only then we can build up. We cannot have world peace when there is violence in some parts of the world against some groups of the people, as we cannot have peace in the world as long as human rights are being violated. So I thank you very much for having invited my committee, and I do hope that all these forms of violence that are happening every day in every country, in every group of society, are being considered by people who can then work on raising the awareness of the others, because only when we are aware we can change. Thank you very much.